In this video, I'm going to show you a simple way to boost your app's performance in Django with caching. By using the Django cache framework, you'll reduce the number of queries sent to your database, which should greatly improve performance in most situations. For the examples in this video, I'll show you 3 different ways to use caching: for caching views, caching parts of templates, and working directly with the cache API. To use caching, you need some kind of backend store. For this video, I'll use a Redis instance hosted on Savala, but there are several different approaches you can take to set up the backend without changing how the overall caching system works. I already have the beginnings of a Django app for our example, so let's get into this video where I demonstrate the Django cache framework. To start using a cache, I need a place to store the cache data. For that, I'm going to set up a Redis instance. So I'll go to Savala and create a database. We'll create Redis. I'll use the defaults here, and I'll create a database. And then I'll just wait for it to finish creating. Okay, so my Redis instance is ready. So what I'll do for this example here is I'll go to networking here on the left, and then I'll enable the external connection so I can connect to this Redis instance from my local environment. And then it's going to give me this external connection URL, so I'll just go ahead and copy it. Then I'll go back to my Django app, and let's go to settings, and at the bottom, I will put a settings key called caches. And inside of here, I need to have a default cache. And then for this, I need the backend, which I'll put in a second. And then I'll need the location. The location is going to be the URL that I just copied, so I'll paste it in there. And the backend is going to be this value. So Django core cache backends Redis and then Redis cache. And this will allow us to use the Redis cache to store all the cache data. And because I'm using Redis, I need to make sure it's available. So I'll install it. So uv add Redis, and that will just make it available in my project. Okay, so now that the cache is set up, I can start using it. So let me go to views.py. And what I have here are 3 views where I'm going to demonstrate how to use the cache in different ways. So I have those set up already and they just return templates, but the app doesn't really do anything yet beyond that. I have this one model called story that has a few fields. The basic idea is these are like news stories and they have authors, titles, some content, a created at, and then also a number of views. So how many times has the story been viewed on the site? So those are the columns in my model. So let's go back to views and we'll work on the index. So what I want to do in this index for this example is in here, I have a section for stories. So the basic idea is I want to show all the stories that are available on the site, and then the users will be able to see them when they go there. So let's start here. Let's go to views.py again, and I'm going to import the story model. So from.models import story. And what I want to do here is I want to query for all the stories that are available across my entire system. So stories equals story.objects.all. And I'm going to pass those stories into the template context. So stories, just like that. And that should be objects. And then inside of the template, I can loop over those stories. So for story in stories, I want to display something. So I have some styles set up. So I need to set up a story card. And inside that story card, what I'll do is I'll have an H2, which will have a link to the story. So I'll fill that in a second because I need to work on this other view for the detail. But for now, I'll just have an empty link. And then inside of here, inside of the link, it's going to be story.title. And then underneath the title, I want to put the content. So I'll have a class here and we say story content and story content right there. And then finally at the end, I need an in4. And now I can start up my app. So we'll do uv run manage.py run server, and we'll load the page and we see these are all the news stories in my system. So the oldest story is the first story here, and then I added a few more here. So the idea behind this example is any news site is not going to be publishing new news stories constantly, but every time this page gets loaded by a user, queries have to run against the database. So in this example, it's pretty simple. And what I can show you is I can show you the number of queries that are being run. So I can go to /silk because I have Django Silk set up. And let me just clear out the database of everything. And here what I'll do is I'll load the page and I'll look at that one request, right? So if we look here, there is one query on app story. So one query really isn't that bad, but imagine in a real app, you have multiple queries that are necessary to generate this one page here. But like I said, we're not going to have news stories constantly. So instead of having each user generate a bunch of queries against the database for this home page, why don't we just have it to where this home page is stored in the cache? That way, the users don't have to query the database. So let me show you how to set that up. So let's go over to views.py, and we're going to import a decorator. So we can say from django.views.decorators.cache import cache page. And then we can take this and put it above one of our views. So I'm going to put it above the index view. So cache page there. And it takes at least one argument. The one argument that you want to pass here is going to be how long to store something in the cache. So I can do 60 seconds, but really 60 seconds is not a long time. Really, you want to do 10, 15 minutes, an hour, a day. Obviously, it depends on your use case. Let's say for our news site, we only get news stories like a few times a day. So maybe having the cache be like an hour or two would be good. But instead of putting an hour, for this example, I'm just going to put 20 seconds. So 20 here. So the cache is only 20 seconds long so we can see it working, right? So first, what I want to do is I want to refresh the stories page here. So I'll refresh and nothing really happens. So everything is the same. But if you look at the profiler, if we look here, the first one has one query and the second one has 0 queries, right? So we see 0 queries here. And after 20 seconds or so hopefully it's been 20 seconds, if I refresh again, we see we still get 0 here. So it should still be in the cache. So let me try again. And there we go. So we go from 0 queries to 1 query. And that's because the cache has expired and it's regenerating everything and putting it back into the cache. So we see we have 1 query. So what I want to show you now is I want to show you what happens when you add more data. So let me add a story. Testing the cache, and I'll assign it to Anthony. And this is a test of the cache. Okay. So before I submit this, let me load the page again. And we see here, the stories are the same. Now let me go ahead and save this and then refresh. So we see as I refresh the page, the new story doesn't appear. And the reason why it doesn't appear is because this is loading from the cache. It is not generating a query to get the latest story. It is going to wait until it expires and then generate the query. And now we see that testing the cache has showed up because the 20 seconds have expired. So like I said, it depends on your site. So obviously it would be a lot longer than 20 seconds, but depending on how often you expect the page to change, that's how you determine what the cache length should be. So like I said, an hour might be good, a day might be good. It just depends. But 20 seconds is obviously way too short for the cache. So that's one way of doing it. So now let me go to a second way of dealing with caches. So for this, I want to set up the links to my story detail. So what I'll do is in here, I'll say URL, and then I have a view called story detail. And this should be story underscore detail. So story underscore detail. And then I want to pass the story ID. So now if I go back to the app, refresh, I should be able to click on any of these links and it takes me to the story detail. So let me fill in that template now. So let's go over to story detail. And for the title, I'll just do story.title. And then for the content, I'll do story.content. Okay. So this still won't appear because inside of views, we need to grab that story. So I'll do story equals and then story.objects.get, and then the primary key is going to be story ID. And then I'll pass that story to the template. So now if I load one of the story detail pages now, we see the title and we see the content of the story. So here's another one. So for this one, as you saw in the database, I have this views field on the story. And the idea is every time someone views one of the stories, this will increase. So the simplest way of doing it is just doing it right inside of the view. So I'll do story.views plus equals 1, and I'll do story.save. So now if I go here, so this is the film festival one. Let's go back and click on that one. So here, and I'll just refresh a few times. Okay. Now if I go here and refresh, we see it has 14 views. And of course, if I do that on another one, just do that a couple, we see it has 2. So the idea behind doing this is everything on this page seems to be something that I can cache, but I'm also doing some work that I can't cache. So if I put the cache on this entire view, the views would only be incremented every time the page was regenerated so it can be loaded back into the cache. And because it'd be pulling from the cache, let's say every hour, then the views would update just once an hour instead of once every time someone goes to the page. And that's not something that we want. So what we can do in this one is we can use template caching instead of view caching. So the template caching happens inside of the template. So let's go over to the story detail template. Let's now cache the story content. So what I can do up here is I can first load the tag cache. And then for the story content, I can go here. And then I need to pass in cache here, followed by a time. So let's say 20 seconds. And then I need to give this a name. So the name that I'm going to give this is story, right? And then let's see what happens. So I'm going to in cache here. So the idea is I'm caching the title and the content here. So let's go back and let's take a look. So this is story 9. So I'm going to refresh here. Let's go to story 6 and we see testing the cache. So this is not the right story. If I go to city council, I'm still getting testing the cache. So what's happening here? Well, the reason why this is happening is because I am caching that one section for all the different stories. So if I want to make this unique per story, I need to add something that is unique per story after the name of it. So after story here, I can pass in story.title. And what this will do is it will cache based off of the story and the title together. And I can also do the ID or primary key, but let's just keep it as title. So now when I go back and refresh here, I get the correct story. If I go back and go to a different one, the local school one, now I get the correct information, right? So depending on how you want to use it, you might have to pass in some unique information. So the rule of thumb here is if this information can vary inside the template, then you have to pass some value that makes this unique so it loads correctly on each individual page. But if this is the same in all cases, then you don't need to pass in this value after the name. But you do need a name. So in this name, it's just story, and just know that this story is separate from this one. Maybe to make this even better, I can make this different. So I can say story detail or something like that, just to make it different from this story. So this is a name. This is the name that's going to be used in the cache. And then this is the unique value that is going to basically be added to the cache key to make this unique. Okay, so let's do one more example of caching. So let's go back to views. So for this one, I'll do this in this stories endpoint here. So what I want to do here is I want to access the cache directly. And this is the last way that I want to cover using the cache. So inside of stories, I'm going to use it in that way. So first I need to import something. So I'll say from django.core.cache, I want to import cache. And what this allows you to do is it allows you to use the cache in any way that you want. So for a project that I'm working on, I have a cache key set up to basically tell me the last time a user was active. And the reason why I'm doing this is because I want to sync some data in the background every time a user is active, but I don't need to sync that data constantly. I just basically want to make sure that I sync the data in reasonable intervals when the user is actively using the app. So if they're not using the app, then I don't need to sync the data. But as soon as they start using the app, I want to sync the data. And if they've been using the app for, let's say, 10, 15 minutes, I want to sync it again after those 15 minutes. So I'll show you how to do something equivalent in here. So the first thing you need is a cache key. So I'm going to set up the cache key here as a variable. You could use it directly in the call, but I'll set up a cache key. I'll make this an F string. And for this example, we'll say like last active. And then I want to know when the user was last active. So I'll do request.user.id. So I'm combining the last active with the user ID to make it unique. And then I want to get the value for last active. So last active equals cache.get and then cache key here. So I'm getting the value out of the cache. I haven't put it in there yet, but just imagine that this is some time value and it's going to tell me the last time that a user was active. And then I want to have some kind of time limit. So for this, I need to import time. So up here, we'll do import time. And for the limit, I want to say that the time limit is 20 seconds again. So time, and then 20 seconds, right? So whatever the time it is now, minus 20 seconds. And I'll show you how to use this in a second. I'm going to use it inside of an if. So first I'll say if not last active, meaning that there was no value for this particular cache key in the cache. So if not last active, I'm going to do something in the if, or I'll say if the last active is in the cache, but it's less than the limit, meaning the last time the user was active was before the limit expires. So I need to refresh the data. I'm going to go inside of this if. And for refreshing, I'll just print something. So I'll say print and then syncing user activity. Once this happens, I can update the cache. So to update the cache, I call cache.set, and then I'll pass in the same cache key, and then I'll put in some values. So for the value, I'm going to put whatever time it is right now, and then I need to specify how long this is going to remain active. So I'll just put 20 seconds. So cache get and cache set work together. So set adds something to the cache and get retrieves it from the cache, and you just have to make sure that they have the same cache key like I'm doing here. So now with this, let me go to the stories page. And actually what I want to do is I want to show you all the stories in the system again. So I'll query for this and I'll pass the stories to the template in the same way. So let's go to stories here. And to make this even better, it's most read stories. So I'll order these by the number of views. So that order by and then minus views. Okay, so that will give me the most read stories. So then in this section here, I can loop over stories. So for story and stories. And then I just want to do the thing with the story card again. So we can grab it from the index. And for this, I'll just use the titles instead of the content here. Okay, so now let's go over to the stories page. So the URL for that is going to be /stories. So let's go to /stories. And we see the most read stories here, right? And if we go back here, we see syncing user activity. So let me refresh a few more times. If we go back, we still only see one instance of syncing user activity. But if I wait a little bit longer, I should be able to get it to sync the user activity again because it only should last for 20 seconds. So let's go back here and refresh. And we see here it's syncing user activity again. And of course, if I refresh again, it doesn't sync the user activity. So for this last one, whatever use case you can come up with, it may be a good fit so you don't have to query the database constantly, or in this case, not even querying the database, but just knowing the last time that something happened, it can be useful for something like that instead of storing it in your main database where you have to set up like a model and everything. So I think this is a much better approach for things like this. So with that, you've seen the three main types of caching in Django that are actually practical. So caching views, caching templates, which I showed you in the detail template here, and caching using the cache API, which I showed you in this last example. So now you should know enough to reduce the workload on your database depending on your particular app's use case and what your users expect. If you're interested in using Redis on Savala for your own cache backend, you can sign up today and get a free $50 credit. Also, if you want to see more videos like this, please like and subscribe to this channel.